Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 9, when the Apostle Paul encourages the Philippians. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there be any excellence, if there be anything worthy of praise, think on these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you.
Good morning. Good to see you all here this morning. Such a pleasure. This is New Year's Day. Happy New Year's. You guys aren't home watching the parades. I thought about putting a slide up of a parade float from years past, but decided it wasn't necessary. You can watch it in reviews or rewinds, whatever they call them. But we do have some things to do. This is the first day of the year, and we typically do things to try and make our year better. And we're encouraged in the scriptures to do certain things. And this one in particular seems to be one that's ideally suited for a New Year's Day sermon. Think on these things, Philippians chapter 4. If anything is lovely, he says. You know, this world is filled with a lot of things that are not lovely at all. We can tend to focus on them. We can look at them and focus on them and decide that that's what the world really is. Or we can choose to not focus on that and look instead to the things that are lovely. But it's our choice, and that's something we sometimes forget. So remember that as we go through that this morning. It's New Year's Day. The question is, what are you going to do this year? Actually, that's not the question. This is the question. What are you going to do this year that's different from last year? That's the most important part, isn't it? You want this next year to be exactly the same as last year? How many of you thought 2016 was a great year? A couple of you did. You're weird, but okay. How many of you want to go back and do it again? A couple of you do. Yeah, but you spent 6 months going to Alaska. That's not fair. Yeah, the problem is we don't want to go back through some of that negative stuff all over again, do we? So we want to do things different this year. The question is, are you going to make more promises? Well, of course, those are promises that you're going to break again this year, just like you did last year. Or are you really going to do better this year? It's a question that seems legitimate, especially to Christians. But one thing we want is to understand what it's going to take to make it a better year. This little short illustration comes from the computer industry. The term they came up with was GIGO. Now, most of us know what that means without being told, but what that literally means is garbage in, garbage out. It's a very simple concept. I always heard that computers never make mistakes, people do. Well, that was what this was emphasizing. It's the inputter that made the mistake, not the computer that made the mistake. I think it was a computer that came up with the term personally, just blamed somebody else, but maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But garbage in, garbage out is a legitimate principle, isn't it? It comes from the time when mostly it was data of some sort that computers used. If that data was corrupted when it came in, then the computer was going to spit out an answer that was corrupted as well. Now, if that was an artillery shell trajectory, which is what a lot of computers were used for initially, then that shell could fall on the wrong place, couldn't it? And in particular, it could fall on our own soldiers or perhaps on some other civilian category that we didn't want it to fall on. It could be really devastating, couldn't it? Data has to be accurate when it goes in. What do you put into your mind? Now, I know this is embarrassing. How many hours a day do you spend in front of the TV? Anybody spend time in front of the TV? Come on, raise your hand. Do you spend time in front of the TV every day? Okay, I do. I absolutely do. What do you watch when you turn it on? Now, I tell everybody, well, I watch Sci-Fi Channel, or I watch the New Comet or whatever, with the B-grade and lower movies, which are some of the best movies ever horribly put on screen. That's not true. I watch other things too. And sometimes there are things I shouldn't watch. I need to quit that, don't I? What do I put into my mind? See, everything I watch, I'm putting into my mind. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. What you put into your mind, however, determines what you get out. There's that garbage in, garbage out again. So keep it in mind. If your input is garbage, then what do you get? You get, I can't hear you. Garbage, that's right. Garbage in, garbage out. It's a very simple process. Are we really surprised by this, though? Weren't we told by our parents to be careful what we think? Weren't we taught when we were younger that we needed to think pure things and good things and think on positive things, think sweet things? We needed to act that way. How do you expect a child to act like a sweetheart when he's being yelled at and cursed at all the time? It's kind of hard, isn't it? So we teach our children this. Are we really surprised by this truth? Here's another thought. Scientists tell us that the average person has about 10,000 separate thoughts every day. I bet some of you are surprised you didn't know your brain was that active, did you? Well, that means, how many 75-year-olds do we have in here? 75 or older? Okay, we got a couple, got a few. Okay, good. You're going to have about 26 million different thoughts in your lifetime. That's impressive. Ray, you're impressing me already. That's just a marvelous number of thoughts. Now, the question really is, though, are any of them any good? We kind of question that, and we throw it out there sillily, but we compare ourselves with Einstein. How many thoughts did he have? Same I have, right? Yeah, but his thoughts were so much bigger than mine. Well, not really. They were just different than mine. But he thought of things that made a difference in the world, didn't he? Gandhi, 10,000 thoughts a day. But look at what he did with his thoughts. You, look at what you've done with your thoughts. What are we going to do with our thoughts this next year? Most of you already have had 2,000 separate thoughts this morning alone. Did you realize that? Now, some of them are mundane. What tie should I wear or not wear? What shirt should I put on? Do I need to shave again before I go this morning? Whatever it may be. But some of them are significant. But it means you've got another 8,000 thoughts to go today. You plan on any of them being any good? Well, yeah, I plan on all of mine being good, aren't you? Sure. Well, what are you going to do to make them then? You're going to float through and just wait and see what comes up? That's what most of us do, isn't it? I'm just going to see what happens. But every one of those 10,000 thoughts represents a choice you make. A decision to think about this, but not that. Let's illustrate it another way. Let's say somebody gave you $10,000 cash this morning with the requirement that you give it all away by bedtime tonight. $10,000. Remember the manna in the wilderness? This $10,000 is just like that manna in the wilderness. It disappears overnight, okay? You have to spend it all today. How would you go about spending it? Well, the first thing, would you just wait and see what comes out? Just kind of see what comes across your path and then decide how to spend it based on what comes across your path? Maybe you would give roll with the flow, I guess is what we'd call that, wouldn't we? Give some to family, give some to the panhandler on the street corner. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Yeah, that'd be a real good idea. Immediately go out and buy things you want. Well, we are Americans after all, aren't we? This is the season when we've done that. By the way, the best time to buy is right now after Christmas, isn't it? That's what I keep hearing. I don't have any car to do it now. Maybe you'd go out with that $10,000 and buy a car or a big screen TV. Or you would deliberately plan out anyway what you'd want to do with it, wouldn't you? You would pause and maybe make plans. But isn't it sad that we'd make more plans for that $10,000 than we do for the 10,000 thoughts we have today? We have the ability to make a choice. But some of you say, yeah, but that $10,000 is uncommon. Well, if you were going to have it every day, it wouldn't be uncommon, would it? But the other thing, too, is those 10,000 thoughts are just common. I have those 10,000 thoughts every day. So I don't even pay attention to them because I'm going to have them again tomorrow, aren't I? And sometimes they're going to be the same weak thoughts we had the day before, aren't they? But that's not really the reason that we would do that, is it? The reason we would do it is because we think money has higher value than our thoughts. And that's wrong. We really shouldn't think that way. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Beware what you put your mind on, because that you will surely become." Norman Vincent Peale says, "Change your thoughts, change the world." Do we believe stuff like that? We hear it. It's not Bible, perhaps, but do we really think that those things are true? Henry Ford said something I think makes a lot of sense. Thinking is the hardest work in the world, which is probably why so few people engage in it. A little cynical maybe, but yeah. Betty Cicelli said something else. The two thoughts cannot occupy the mind at the same time. So the choice is ours whether or not our thoughts will be constructive or destructive. Now, that sounds reasonable to me. We have a choice as to whether it's going to be one or the other. And you choose that yourself today. God will give you 10,000 thoughts today. What are you going to do with them? You make the choice. So the question is, how is your thought life, Christian? How is your thought life? We know negative thinking. We know positive thinking. But how can I change my mind? Those are the 3 points we're going to go through this morning. Negative thinking includes self-pity, blaming, unwillingness to change, anger and bitterness. Self-pity, well, we all fall into this trap every once in a while, don't we? Into each life some rain must fall, and it's our choice then as to how we're going to respond to it. And we often will just fall into self-pity. Self-pitying person says things like, "I'm getting more than my fair share." You don't know what I'm going through. Boy, that's a quick and easy one, and I hear it all the time. It's not fair. I remember working with teenagers, and I thought it was the most fascinating thing in the world. These perfectly logical human beings otherwise would cry out, "It's not fair." And one of the therapists would cry back, "Who told you it was supposed to be fair?" It's not fair. Okay, so it's not fair. But that's what the self-pitying person says. Blaming person says, "Okay, I'm going to find a scapegoat for my problems." This is much more satisfying than taking responsibility for myself, isn't it? That other somebody might be, however, your husband, your wife, your children, your parents, or even a friend or neighbor. It can also be your boss or somebody at church. And I've seen it where it was somebody at church where they blame somebody else for their problems. It's dangerous partly because it leads to perpetual victimhood. But that's not the only reason. The next one is unwillingness to change. Once you immerse yourself in self-pity and discover that you are a victim, the logical conclusion is that you can't or won't change. But I want to change. Do you really? Sometimes we're not really willing to, are we? This tends to be self-reinforcing too. Since you cannot change, then your behavior cannot be your fault. I like that. This person says, "It's no use trying, I'll never change. I have every right to be hurt, and I'm not going to give it up." That's one I like real well. I like this, so I'm going to hold on to it. God made me this way, so it's not my fault. How often have we heard that recently? We hear it all the time in certain communities, don't we? It's God's fault, not my fault. Well, this all leads to anger and bitterness, negative thinking again. Since you're not to blame for your problems, when others suggest you ought to be, you respond with anger and bitterness. You remember every little miserable thing ever done to you or against you. I've seen husbands and wives come in for counseling like that. She remembers everything he ever did before they were even married. And then he turns right around and makes a list equally long about her. And then they wonder why they're having trouble. You stew over the slightest negative remark made by others. You bristle at the notion that your life could be different. You hold grudges even though you insist you do not. I mean, The greatest anger you'll respond is someone who is holding a grudge and you tell them so. They're going to insist otherwise, aren't they? You glare and turn away your head when you see your enemy coming towards you. I've seen Christians do that in church, in the auditorium, on Sunday morning. Your thoughts matter. They actually determine what you're going to do. Negative thinking leads to negative living. Positive thinking, on the other hand, we also have that choice, don't we? Philippians 4, verse 8, the Apostle Paul gives a prescription for positive thinking that is superior to any earthly offering. And we've read it, so we're not going to read it again. We're just going to go through it. Question is, though, and that's how we should actually do it. Before you think, act, speak, or do, ask yourself these questions. Is it true? Is it noble? Is it right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Is it admirable? Boy, a lot of us wouldn't be saying a whole lot anymore after these 6 points, would it? Two other questions, though. Is it morally excellent? That's a beautiful statement. And is it God approved? Perhaps the most beautiful of all. Is it true? This question rules out all that is dishonest or less than honest as well. Well, I told her the truth. Oh, you told her about, no, I didn't tell her that. I didn't think she needed to know that. Okay, you're not being honest then, are you? Honesty completely. Is it true? Is it noble? This is honorable, worthy of reverence. It's also used as a reference to elders. Elders are supposed to be noble in their thinking. Wow, that puts them at a level that's a little bit different, isn't it? But we're told that we're supposed to be noble in our thinking too, aren't we? We just did right here. Do you think on noble things? Do you think on things that are honorable or worthy of reverence? The third question, is it right? That means, is it in conformity with God's standards? God's standards, not ours. Not, is it right in my eyes? Not, is it right in my friend's eyes? Not, is it right in my culture's eyes? Not, is it right in my government's eyes? But rather, is it right in God's eyes? That changes it completely, doesn't it? Would you be ashamed or embarrassed if your thoughts were broadcast on a screen? Let's say this screen actually had Tom Sparks' thoughts up here right now. First of all, most of us would be laughing, but the rest of us might not. But would you be embarrassed to have your thoughts up there on the screen? What you're thinking right now, even. Sometimes it's hard to keep focused, isn't it? We're human beings. That's one of the reasons why. But would you be embarrassed if it happened? Next question, is it pure? Pure is one of those beautiful things. Pure means undefiled, chaste, holy, clean. Think on these things. Ask yourself, is it clean? Is it pure? Is it holy? Is it undefiled? The theme is moral purity. Moral purity. Is your thought life clean? The phrase we used to hear was, get your mind out of the gutter. You guys remember that? I heard my grandmother say that to me a couple of times. I said, what? I didn't know what it meant. She explained it to me. I said, oh, okay. I didn't know it was in the gutter. That was often the case with Grandma. I didn't know. But is your thought life morally pure? Clean? Is it out of the gutter? Or is it in the gutter? I'd asked about television earlier. Are there some things that are in the gutter on television? You don't have to nod your head very high. You just acknowledge that, yeah, there is. Are there some pure and clean things on television as well? Yeah, but you have to look a lot harder for them, don't you? A lot harder for them. Maybe we should just get rid of television then. Well, that's up to you. That's a personal decision, a moral decision perhaps, but a personal decision nevertheless. Christian men, there's a group that has a group of 7 questions they ask their men to ask each other every week, to hold each other accountable as Christian men. Have you been with a woman in the past week in a way that could appear compromising? Not that you actually compromised your faith or your morals, but it could appear so. See, we're supposed to avoid the appearance of evil too, aren't we? Have all your financial dealings been filled with integrity? Boy, that's a tough one sometimes, isn't it? Have you viewed any sexually explicit material? Well, depending on your definition of sexually explicit, that could be just turning on the television, or it could be much, much worse than that. It's a matter of your definition there, but if you ask each other that every week, and you know you're going to be asked that every week, wouldn't you want to make sure that you're doing it? But by the way, God asks us that every week, doesn't he? He checks with us all the time. Christian men, have you spent adequate time in Bible study and prayer? No, not really. Okay. Being honest. Sometimes we need to quit being honest and actually get down and do it, don't we? Here's another one. Have you spent quality time and given priority to your family? We have an obligation, Christian men. We have a God-given responsibility to our family, our children. If we don't do that, there's no excuse that's good enough. I was too busy with work, or I was starting this new business and I was at a critical time. No, that's not good enough. You have a responsibility before God to your family. Christian men, have you fulfilled the mandate of your calling? We have been called to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. We have been called to preach the gospel. We have been called to the ministry of the gospel, haven't we? To a life of the gospel. And here's the one that probably kills us, is the last one. Have you just lied to us? 7 questions. Have you lied to us in any of those questions and the answers you gave? Oof. Now, if you're willing to lie, then that'd be okay here too, wouldn't it? No, I haven't lied. I haven't lied at all. If you're willing to lie. Have you ever known somebody who couldn't lie to save their lives? They're rare, though, aren't they? They're an exception rather than the rule. Christians need to be that exception. Have you lied to us in any of these? Great questions to ask to keep us on track, isn't it? Is it lovely? This is unique in the New Testament. This word is not used anywhere else. And it means love towards, or those things that grace attracts. A thought may be true and even right, but still be wrong because it does not attract grace. I've seen Christians this way, preachers, preach these powerful, true sermons without an ounce of love in it whatsoever and think they're doing God's will. We need to be aware of the fact that the thought needs to be lovely. It needs to attract grace. It needs to be something that is beneficial to God's work. Is it lovely? If it's not lovely, or if it does not make you lovely, then don't think it. In fact, don't think it, don't say it, don't do it. We're supposed to be doing things that are lovely. Don't repeat it for sure. Well, it's true. It doesn't matter. Gossip is gossip, whether it's true gossip or not. I guarantee it's true gossip when I say it because I wouldn't lie, right? That's not good enough. Don't dwell on it. That's what he says here. Dwell on these things. When he says think on these things, that's what he's talking about. Is it admirable? Well, that's a beautiful statement. Admirable is as opposed to cheap and tawdry. Is it constructive or destructive? Does it build up or does it tear down? You know, that's a powerful one right there. Fathers with their children need to learn that from the very start. That should be one of the things they're cautioned about when the baby is born. Father, be constructive, not destructive with your child. And then every day they need to be reminded, be constructive, not destructive with your child. Mothers, you need to be reminded, be constructive, not destructive with your child. Now, most mothers and fathers know that. And most mothers and fathers remember that. There's a lot out there who don't. And part of what we've got to do as Christians is to share with each other and support each other and help in that fashion as well. Does it construct or does it destruct? Now, these are some things, by the way, Christians need to know everything that's going on in the world, don't we? Well, you've got that internet feed, don't you, that gives you all the news. It's news to be fit to be print, it used to say. News comes on the internet to you. You find out about the murders in such and such a place of the preachers that had their heads cut off. You find out about the white slave trade that's going on under your noses in your own city. but you think of it always as being way over there somewhere. Young children being taken for sexual prostitution. And you think of it somewhere else. Do you need to know about that? Do you need to actually see that? Do you need to actually see the pornography to know that pornography is wrong? Do you need to see the killing and the violence to know that violence is unacceptable? Or can you know in Christ that it's not acceptable and don't need to see it? There are things being passed around to Christians saying, you need to see this. No, I don't. I don't need to see that. I don't need to know. As a Christian, I am supposed to be focusing on pure and lovely things, not all that garbage that Satan's putting out there. So what we need to do is we need to clear our minds out all the way through. The next one, is it morally excellent? 2 Timothy 2:15. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, handling correctly the word of truth. A man approved by God? Man, that's an enormous goal, isn't it? No, it's not really. It's one that God gives us from the very start. He says, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved. Is it true? Is it noble? Is it right? Is it pure? Well, that's a hard one. Is it lovely? Is it admirable? And of course, is it morally excellent? And is it God approved? Well, the question is, how can I change my mind, though? You've got this whole year ahead of you. You've got 10,000 thoughts a day. How do I change my thinking? Well, I'll think about it later. Let me go turn the TV on. I'll think about it later. Let me go, whatever it is you do that's not pure and lovely. How can I change my mind? The hardest thing in the world is to change somebody's mind. Now, the problem with that is I can't change your mind. Christians think we're supposed to change everybody else's mind. You can't do that. How can I change my mind? That's what I have control over. 2 Timothy 2:15 again. Study, give diligence to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. How about if I start with using the word of truth correctly? How about if I am applying myself fully to being the workman that God's approved? How about I start with that? Philippians 2, verse 12. As you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but how much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Work out your own salvation. That's not saying we work in order to be saved. That's saying you work it out. You figure it out. This is your job, not mine. It's not the preacher's job. It's not the elder's job. That's your job. God's given you everything you need to know to be able to work it out, but it's your responsibility to then work it out. We need to start the year off right by doing so. 2 Timothy 2, verse 22. Flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness. Man, if we just did that alone, that would... Now, some of us are old enough in where we say, youthful passions? I've forgotten what those were. Yeah, well, maybe so. But pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace. That would be something we could all do, wouldn't it? Hebrews 2, verse 1, therefore we must pay much closer attention. I'll say it right in a minute. Much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. Pay attention. Boy, how many times did your mom tell you that? My mom used that word. I thought that was my name for a while. Ephesians 5, verse 2, walk in love. As Christ loved us, he gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Walk in love. How do you change your minds? Do these things. At one time, we were living in darkness, and now you are the light of the world. Walk as children of light. Man, that's a great calling, isn't it? Walk as children of light. How do we do that? We don't put light bulbs in our ears and have them light up. That's not the way it works. We live as light in the world. We live as Christ in the world. And we do that every day. We do it intentionally. We do it on purpose. We do it because we are striving to live like him. Ephesians 5:12. It is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. Remember the question asked earlier, are there some things we should not see? Yeah. There are some things that we should not even speak about? Yeah. We don't have to specify all those things, do we, in order to preach against them? We don't have to know them in order to preach against them. We don't have to do them and then repent of them in order to understand how deep we can go and how great God's grace is to bring us out of that depths. Remember a preacher that I was talking to one time, a young man who went to the same school I had gotten out a couple of years before. He was preaching just outside of El Paso, Texas at the time. And we were talking about the experience preachers have before they become preachers. And stupid me, I was young and stupid, and I said something about, well, yeah, but if you've experienced sinful life before you became a Christian and have come to the Lord to become a preacher, then you understand it better. Boy, did I get a dressing down. And rightfully so. We don't need to go through that to understand God's grace. We don't need to go through that filth in order to understand God's cleansing power. And he made sure I knew that. And he was right. But there are some things we shouldn't even look at, shouldn't even see, shouldn't even talk about, shouldn't read about. Colossians 3, verse 2. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth. That would be the number one thing we should do this year. You're going to change your thinking? Then set your minds on Christ. Lift your mind, lift your eyes to where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Don't look at what's around you and focus on that. Don't get mired down in the filth and the muck of this world. My dad used to talk about an example of how that if you walk in the gutter, you're going to get dirty. And he said it'd be kind of silly. It'd be like a bride wearing her wedding gown and going down into a coal mine. Have you ever seen the coal miners coming out after work? They don't look like people, do they? They're caked and covered in coal dust. What in the world would a bride be doing taking herself down in her wedding gown into a coal mine? We wouldn't do that, would we? Then why would we take the bride of Christ, that's us by the way, down into the gutter where the filth and all of the sin, why would we do that? Colossians 3, verse 16 and 17. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. You want to change your mind? Do that. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Let that be something that guides your life. Let that be something that it permeates your thinking, makes you think differently. And whatever you do in word or in deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. May we truly do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus. We have an invitation we offer, and it's for your benefit. I pray that this invitation, though, is not one in which you come down here this morning, although if you need to, by all means do. Rather, that in your heart you've made a decision that you're going to change your thinking this year. That you're going to think on these things, that you're going to dwell on the things that God has given us to dwell on instead of the world around us, instead of the things that the world is throwing at us. I pray that we will truly transform into the form of Jesus, into his shape, into his life in our lives as well. But if you have need to come for the invitation, won't you come now while we stand and sing?